Do you often fantasize about leaving your job? Do you think about putting in your papers and taking a break? Do you also often wake up not wanting to go to work, the same work that you once loved? Do you now fail to find a purpose in it? The same job that you were once really good at, the one that you really wanted to get? Do you now feel you're not good enough? Well, I have news. You may be burnt out. More news, you're not alone. At least 52% of American workers are burnt out. 1 in 3 Indian professionals is burnt out. 66% of Russians are burnt out. So are 51% of Germans. 53% of millennials were burnt out even before the pandemic began. Now that number is 59%. 58% of the Gen Z is burnt out. If you're feeling helpless about work, it is a result of burnout. It also makes people feel incompetent, emotionally exhausted, isolated and cynical. So why does this happen? Why do people feel burnt out? We will try to answer these questions in this episode of Gravitas Plus. Hello and welcome. I'm Palki Sharma and let me say this at the outset. Now is not the easiest time to be an employee. Talent is aplenty. Everyone is running a rat race, fighting to keep up with tight deadlines, pushing limits to reach new heights, struggling to stay relevant. Our jobs are not 9 to 5 anymore. Most of us are working round the clock, receiving work calls, replying to work emails any time of the day and any day of the week. In short, our jobs are stressful and burnout is a result of such prolonged stress. Now, some of you must be thinking stress can be a result of what's happening in your personal life too, or a financial crisis. Yes, and by all means. So many things in our life can result in chronic stress. But when it comes to burnout, this phenomenon is job specific. Burnout is solely driven by our job. So what exactly does it feel like to be burnt out? 1, you may stop enjoying the work you do. 2, you may not be able to identify with the role anymore. You start asking yourself questions like, why am I doing what I'm doing? 3, you may feel incompetent, as if you aren't good enough anymore. 4, you may face physical problems like headaches, joint pain, sleep problems. 5, you may feel stressed, sad, even hopeless. You see, burnout has a strange way of expressing itself. The exhaustion is such that you may stop being compassionate. You may find yourself ill-treating your colleagues, misbehaving with people. You may also find yourself getting out of office and heading straight for a drink. Resorting to alcohol or drug abuse is a classic symptom of burnout. And so is fantasizing about quitting your job. You know, we often dismiss these symptoms by calling it a bad day or a mood swing. But when these bad days start repeating too often, you know there is more to them. And burnout is very, very common today. I cannot emphasize this enough. The kind of work environment we have these days is not sustainable. Most employees are programmed to never say never. The work culture teaches us to say yes to everything that comes our way. Will you be able to take on one more project? Yes. Are you sure you don't mind working through the weekend? Yes. Are you okay working extra hours? Yes. Some of you may have been asked these questions at job interviews. Apparently, these are benchmarks for a good employee. I'm sorry, but they're not. I've said this before and I'll say it again. We've set the wrong definition of sincerity at work. So most employees are forced to bite more than they can chew, just so that they can stay ahead of the curve. But you see, our body can only take so much. Post that, it suffers. I'll show you how. When we are under stress, our body releases higher levels of stress hormones, the likes of cortisol, adrenaline, epinephrine. These hormones help us perform better for some time. They give us the boost to push the envelope. But these hormones harm us in the long run. Let's try and understand the biology of burnout. Cornell University conducted a study. It found that stressors can weaken the functioning of our brain. It affects the prefrontal cortex. And this is the part that's responsible for attention, for memory, impulse inhibition, and cognitive control. Next thing you know, you're losing things, you're forgetting things, saying things you ideally should not be saying. Researchers found that the moment stress is reduced, these effects disappear. But if this mental breakdown is repeated too many times, then our frontal cortex becomes vulnerable to dysfunction, even mental disorders. Experts say burnout is a step before stress overwhelms a person and leads her into depression. Scary, isn't it? I wonder why we don't talk about it enough or address this at work. Experts say there are 3 phases to burnout. First is emotional exhaustion. This is where you feel drained. You lose sleep, you feel worn out. Phase 2 is cynicism. This is where you're annoyed with people. You have a shorter fuse. Phase 3 is where you feel incompetent. You stop feeling effective. Do you resonate with any of this? And if yes, here's what you should do. First, acknowledge the problem. And second, come to terms with the fact that burnout is normal and it's not your fault. Studies show that burnout arises because of systemic failure or organization dysfunction. You may find yourself in a workplace where just a handful of employees do most of the work. Some workplaces are abusive. Some are chaotic. Some have bad managers. Some workplaces are more stressful than others. I'm talking about working in a place like a hospital or an emergency ward. Situations like these contribute to burnout. It leaves you feeling drained, overwhelmed. It's got nothing to do with your ability to take stress. Burnout, like I mentioned before, is workplace driven. So if you're burnt out, the most important thing to do is to talk to your manager, your employer. And what better time than now, the review season? When you meet your manager, have a candid conversation with her. The Harvard Business Review has tips. It says, appeal, do not complain. Don't get complacent. Be specific about the symptom you're experiencing. Let me quote what it says. You don't have to disclose overly personal details, but generalizations like, I'm just really stressed or I'm sick of this job may not help them appreciate the situation. Instead, offer specifics like, I'm feeling overwhelmed by the volume of projects on my plate, or I'm feeling really anxious about meeting all of these deadlines, but they've never bothered me before. Now, what if you're on the other side of the story? What if you're the employer or the manager? I have some questions for you too. Has your team been irritable lately? Do they avoid replying to emails? Are they distracted during important conversations? Well, then you're leading an exhausted team. And here's why you must do something about it. Burnout affects performance. A 2020 study found that burnout increases resignations and absenteeism. Another study found that burnt out employees are 2.6 times more likely to be actively seeking a different job. They are 63% more likely to take a sick day. This could be some of your best employees, burnt out and looking for a way out. Burnout also increases the chances of errors. In other words, if your team is burnt out, its net performance will drop. So what should you as a manager do? 1, ensure that your team is not working long hours, that everyone is sharing work equally, that the work environment is not unsupportive. Above all, as a manager, you can lead by example. Normalize self-care. Normalize taking mental health days and vacations. And above all, try to understand burnout. 80% of business leaders say they do not know how to reduce employee burnout. So what we need is education. And this is where the human resources must step in. While workshops on leadership, talent retention and business is all nice and good, helping business leaders understand burnout is critical, because if employees are not performing well, then there will be no business. If employees are burnt out, then there will be no way to retain them. It is not easy to battle burnout. Some say it takes up to 5 years to recover from a burnout. The goal must be to prevent it in the first place, and it will require a joint effort, a team effort between employees, managers, and the organization. Its success will decide whether or not a company indeed is a great place to work.